Hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again with another installment on my retro emulation guide or journey or chronicle. So we're going to dive straight into it. This is video 10, which is me talking about my Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. This is going to be a kind of technical video. In fact, this is going to be quite obsessively technical to some level. But that said, this isn't necessarily going to be a setup video. For that, I strongly recommend all the other people I've recommended so far to date. This is, in a way, explaining how I fucked around and found out. But what I'm going to be doing is showing a lot of the things that I found out that no other channels anywhere explained at all. And I had to find out completely by myself. No forums, no YouTube tutorials, no YouTube videos, no influencers. No one covered the stuff that I had to learn and I put into these videos. That said, this video is going to be quite long and it's going to be really, really tediously exhaustive. So if you're not interested in the boring technical mundanity, just check out now, come back for tomorrow's video, which is going to be a little bit more philosophical. This one is going to be a detailed Retroid Pocket 3 Plus video. As always, before we dive into it, I just want to say I'm not going to be providing links to any ROMs whatsoever in this video or in any of these videos. But if you are interested in hearing the crazed musings of someone who spent way longer than really was healthy in configuring and setting up a Retroid Pocket, carry on watching.
And hello YouTube, this is my Retroid Pocket 3. This is the case that it came in. This is the official Retroid case, which costs about £10, has nice little tags on it and stuff. It's a dual zip, which is nice. I modified it myself by putting my own little decal for my own personal logo on there, which is quite nice. But other than that, this is the Retroid 3. Um, Other Retroids are available, obviously. You can get the Retroid 4 and the Retroid 4 Pro and the Retroid 5 and all that sort of stuff now. I bought this when it was the peak. It was the most recent thing that they'd done. I do not regret having this at all because it's just such a great emulator. But I guess if I was going to buy one now, I would, of course, buy something a bit more recent. I'm not sure I'd quite buy the Retroid Pocket 5. The form factor isn't one that I love, but this one I absolutely adore. It's just so handy. Look how small it is. Look how dinky it is. It's fantastic. And obviously, I went for the Retro UK SNES color palette there. This has been sitting in a box for about 9 months, and when I switched it on, it was on 80 odd percent battery charge, which is phenomenal, really, when you think about it. So here we have it with this 80% battery charge. Absolutely incredible. What I want to talk about in this video today is I'm going to talk about all the things that essentially no one else told me and I worked out myself when it came to retro emulation. So here are 13 things about a Retroid Pocket 3. All right, firstly, to set this up, you do not need to link it up to your Gmail account. I originally set this up with the intention of making this a gift for someone else. I changed my mind eventually. But what that meant is that I was just using the inbuilt apps that you can just download on the device itself, so all pre-configured. And for that, it's absolutely fine. No problems whatsoever. The only one that there's an impact for not connecting it to my Gmail account and not personalized it was Nintendo DS, as that meant I couldn't download Drastic and I had to use Melon DS. But to be honest, Melon DS works really, really well. Okay, what else to say? Next is just point two, Dreamcast. There is no separate Atomiswave or Naomi folder for this device. And what that means is that what I did is I threw all my Atomiswave and Naomi ROMs into my Dreamcast folder. And they just work. If we look at the list here, as you'll see, the ones that are DC are marked as Dreamcast, the ones that are Atomiswave are marked as Atomiswave, all the way down to the ones as Naomi as well. And you throw them in here, the same emulator will work for all of them. So that's something no one told me, but I worked out myself. Something else that happened, which was quite interesting in terms of Atomiswave, is Atomiswave doesn't really work in a direct way. So let's look at Demolish Fist, rather, which is quite a fun game on Atomiswave. So if you go into it, it loads up your ROMs there, and then it boots into the game. Right, there's the sound. I'll drop the sound a little bit. Right, So this is the intro, and you'll notice that even whilst I'm pressing all the buttons, nothing. Oh, that did work. So the reason that worked is because I set it to work. What you need to do, sorry, I forgot I did this for the video. What you need to do is you need to, when you have the game open like this, what I've just done is the bit I'm trying to show you. You basically swipe in from the left. You have this. This is the emulator like settings page. You go into settings. You go into controls. And then what you need to do is you need to go into the Android Retroid Pocket Controller control. And where it says map, it says Dreamcast controls there. What you do is you change it to arcade controls. And then you'll see that it has the button for inserting a coin. So coin, and I mapped it to the select button. That's a really, really, really important thing to do. Otherwise, your Thomas Wave games, because they're arcade games, you won't be able to actually get into them per se. So if I resume the game here, you'll notice if I keep on pressing select, I will be adding more coins in. And that's just by pressing the select button. All right, to boot out, I'm just going to press home twice. So another thing just to point out is that whilst there's a Genesis folder, there's not actually a Mega Drive folder or a Mega Drive Japan folder. So just throw everything into your Genesis emulator; it'll all work fine. Another tip is just be patient when you're scanning stuff from your SD card. When I scan stuff from my SD card, some of these, Game Boy Advance specifically, took well over 20 minutes just for the Retroid to scan and ingest all the games, even after I copied it over to the SD card. So just be really, really patient there. All right, tip five. If you look at something like MAME, and we've talked a little bit about arcade emulation already, look a bit at MAME. What you'll find is that the default core for this is MAME 2003 Plus, which is fine. But not every game uses that. So if a game doesn't use that, if you go here, you'll notice what I put is I made a note of which core you need to run that particular game. So all that means is for that particular game, you just pick edit and you select that particular core to make it run. You can't save a core per game, but what it means is if, for example, I wanted to play AB Cop, or if, for example, I wanted to play, I don't know, Altered Beast, what I would do is I would go into edit, and then from here, I would select the core that I wanted to use. I would set it for that, and then after setting it for that, I would then save it, and I would then play that particular game. And then when I wanted to play another game, I would set it back to the normal, which is 2003 plus. It's a useful little tip, especially when I was going through my arcade games and it seemed like quite a lot of them weren't working at all. As you can see, I've noted here the default is MAME 2003 plus at the top. Okay, when it comes to Wii and GameCube emulation, I'd strongly recommend using Dolphin for handheld, which is one of the defaults that is built into the Retroid launcher when you're setting it up on the setup wizard and the setup screen and stuff. What I also used was the Taki Udon guide for configuration, which I'll show you a screenshot of here. And basically that works really, really well. It also allows you to stretch the screen to fit the screen if that's what you want to do, and a whole bunch of other things as well. Um, I would strongly recommend using the Dolphin for handheld launcher rather than the more up-to-date version of Dolphin you can get online, just because it seems to work much, much more smoothly. The version of pure Dolphin, I tried to install it myself just to see if I could, and it doesn't recognize all the games and it doesn't launch from within the launcher like this, whereas Dolphin for handheld does. So I would strongly recommend that. Speaking of Wii games, if you go into Wii, what you'll notice is that excitingly, all WiiWare games, of which we have a few here, like the Fast Racing League, for example, you can see the picture there. It's WiiWare, Final Fantasy Chronicles, WiiWare, etc. All these are WiiWare games, and for all these, you can literally just throw them into the folder and they just work, as do, as you can see, Wii games. Another pro tip is that on the WiiWare games, this particular emulator, so Dolphin for handheld, requires them to be unzipped into the WAD format. Not all emulators require that, but this one does. Going into PS2, PS2 did not work initially, and that was mainly down to BIOS issues. We're going to be talking a lot more about BIOS and how it works in video 14, where I do a real deep dive, but this is where and why I learnt BIOS in loads and loads of detail to get this to particularly work. Um, I had to install Ether SX2. We talked about that in our emulation drama video. And I installed it. It works great once I installed this particular bit of BIOS. And I also, having installed the BIOS, followed the installation guide from the Rotaka video channel. And I'll show a picture of that here. That Rotaka guide's got lots of really useful stuff like how to underclock and how to improve performance in various bits and pieces. And it also provides some very useful guidance on how to remove the touchscreen controls for the PS2 console. Something worth noting here, if I go into systems, you'll see that there is no Neo Geo console. No Neo Geo CD. I didn't use Neo Geo, I just threw everything that's a Neo Geo game into the final burn folder. But you can have Neo Geo specific if you want. However, there is no Neo Geo CD or Neo CD folder here. As a result, I couldn't get any of my Neo CD games to work whatsoever. And this is the bit where I dug into that a bit more and I actually realized that I didn't want to keep my Neo CD games because they're essentially exactly the same as the Neo Geo games, just with much larger memory size requirements, which again is something that we've talked about in a previous video. Okay, it's worth noting as well that some Genesis games, much like some of the arcade games, they don't work on the standard emulator. The standard emulator here is Genesis Plus GX. Some of them, not many, but some of them don't work on that. And so for those, I went through and I selected to get them to work on Pico Drive. So there's one example. And here's another example. They don't work on the normal default emulator this is set with. But as I said, go into edit, pick a different emulator, and you can do that and just pick Pico Drive, and that seems to work quite well. Another example of one that doesn't work the way that it should is Street Fighter Alpha. So if we go up to Street Fighter, here we are, Street Fighter Alpha. If we look at this, no, this one, sorry, Street Fighter Alpha 3, and then you'll notice in brackets I put Duck Station. So Street Fighter Alpha 3 and a few other games that lock up at the memory screen. And what you need to do is when you play that, again, go into the edit section, select a different emulator, save it, and then boot up the game, and it works. And then default it back to normal, which for this emulator is PCSX rearmed, and then default it back to normal to that when you play another game as per normal. But again, it's another quirky one. I didn't realize that this was necessary, both for Genesis games and arcade games, and even some PS1 games. But yeah, some of them you have to do bespoke emulation with a bespoke emulator. That's not the default. And finally, for some reason, and I've got no explanation of this, none of my Sega CD games work whatsoever, which is really annoying. I have no idea why. It's really irritating. None of them work. They work on all my other emulation devices, but they don't work on this one, which is really, really frustrating. So in order to get it to work, because the ROMs themselves are fine, what I had to do is that if I go back just one more level, you see this, I had to install Classic Boy, which you can see here, which is a separate emulator. Now this is for open bore, and we'll talk about that much later in video 17, I think. But I've already mentioned Classic Boy is like a really easy retro Sega emulator. I had to install it here separately, and when I want to play a Sega CD game, I have to go into the Classic Boy menu this way, and then I can play my Sega CD games, which is like, it's not the end of the world, but it is a little bit frustrating, especially because later on I set up a Retroid for a friend of mine, and Sega CD does in fact work on his Retroid. Very, very annoying. Well, with that said, these are the tips that I have for retro emulation. These are the tips that I have for the Retroid Pocket 3 specifically. These are little quirks that I learned. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at a couple of different videos that I recorded at the time, so about a year ago, which are videos talking about some quirky things that I noticed about the Retroid. The first one is talking about how to scrape pictures, and I'll be honest, I dive into picture scraping and artwork scraping and just the aesthetic configuration to a really unhealthy degree, but that's only because I got very, very obsessed by it. And then after that, I'm going to show you a little quirky thing I noticed about how some ROMs don't work and how you can diagnose them using the Retroid emulators, which, again, no one else showed me, and I just thought it was worth throwing in here. So hopefully that's useful, hopefully that's helpful, and yeah, let's dive into it. Hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge with another Retroid emulation video. So let's just pop it open. This is the case that came with it, with the charger, and here we have the Retroid. I'm going to power this up and just show you what I'm going on with right now. Basically, as I've said for a lot of these videos, I'm not going to do much of these overhead camera shots because there's much better ones available on the internet. However, there's something that I do want to show, I want to talk about. This is the best way of doing it. So if I just jump into it, we have the screen there. If I dive in, let's go into Retroid Launcher. What I want to talk about today is scraping images and how it's a lot more, I guess, complicated, but definitely nuanced than people make out. So if we have a look at this, what I'm going to do is when you go online and people show you scraped images, they show you scraped images that look basically like this. So this has got loads and loads of scraped images and they've all automatically scraped pretty much. I've had to fix a lot of these, but let's talk about that in a second. My point is that that's actually not how it turns out. If you watch a lot of games, YouTube videos about these games, it'll make it seem as if 95% of the scraping is done automatically. That is not the case. Let's dive into Final Burn Alpha. This is what it actually looks like when you get it. You actually get stuff like this. Like, this is how many gaps there are. There aren't just a few, there are lots of gaps. Lots and lots of gaps. And this is consistently all the way through. You can see there they're trying to find pictures. Will they find pictures? Takes a little while. Nope, they failed. So this just gives you an idea of the kind of thing that we're working with. It's not a bad thing. I'm just saying you need to moderate your expectations. You're going to have to do a lot of this manually. So I've been doing that. This is my Retroid. This is where we are with it. These are all the various consoles. And I may already in the series have talked about it, or maybe diving into it in a second. But my point is, these are the ones which I've gone through and I've curated. Some of these I fixed, some of them I basically found various issues. So for example, on the Dreamcast, there are various games here. For example, this one's Chaos Field that requires a CHD file. I either have or will speak about that later, because what this requires isn't a CD-ROM, but a GD-ROM file, and I had to learn and understand how all that worked. But let's go into one which is largely sorted, which is Genesis. And what I found going into Genesis is that there is loads here which just is not very clear or well known. So, for example, if I go right to the top, you'll see most of these are scraped, but a lot of these were done manually. The first thing I want to point out is that when you do this, a lot of the images don't turn up. And when they don't turn up, that's actually an indication of the fact that the game title is not known by the general kind of Retroid software or the way that it does image scraping. So one of the things that can indicate is that it's actually a bootleg. A bootleg or a hack or an unlicensed game or a homebrew game, basically. So if we go right up to the top and we go up to A, the first one that hasn't got an image is actually Aladdin. Now this is Aladdin 2, which actually isn't a real legitimate game. What Aladdin 2 is a game that was made as a homebrew hack, which is the Aladdin game released on the Super Nintendo, and in fact it's been ported over to the Sega Genesis. So to start off with, it's quite difficult for the system to work out what it is, and for you that's an indication that this is a bootleg game. When you get a game that hasn't got a picture like that, the best thing to do is to just Google the game, Google the title of the game, and see whether or not it's a game which actually is a legitimate game or is a hack of some kind. And if it's a hack of some kind, you'll be able to find it on, there are various websites. There's one that I recommend on the screen here. And that's always a good place to go, where it'll come up in Google searches showing you that there's a particular bootleg of the game. And obviously, if you don't want the bootleg, and I don't, that's your prompt to get rid of it and to delete it from your ROM library. Here we see here, Hercules 2. That's not a real game, that's a bootleg as well, as it turns out. And I know that because I've Googled it via the website I've just shown you. There's also a couple of Lion King ripoffs, Lion King 2, Lion King 3, Magic Girl's a ripoff, Magic School Bus is not a ripoff, as it turned out, but it looked rubbish, so I'm not going to bother with that. Just while we're on that topic, what I will point out is that it does scrape games incorrectly in terms of scraping the image for the game incorrectly. So you'll see here we've got Mega Games 1, Mega Games 2, 3, and then Volume 6, Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. Now, the thing is about this is that originally it scraped all the Mega Games you can see here, so 6 out of the 8 you can see here, with the cover for Mega Game 6 Volume 3, which is the one you can see here. Now, you'll see here as well that it's labelled this as Mega Games Volume 2, and then this one is also labelled as Mega Games Volume 2. Now, it's done that in error, and I know that because I've saved it specifically for this particular video. So here we have Mega Games Mega Games 6 Volume 1. This is Volume 2, and this is Volume 3. So how are we going to confirm that? Well, firstly, let's quit, and let's go to our files. Hopefully this is all reasonably obvious as to where I'm looking and what I'm doing, but if it's not, feel free to slow down the video. If I go into my Genesis files, and I go down to M on the Genesis, this is what I do just for my own peace of mind to confirm I have the games we're talking about. So what we have here is Mega Games, he says, Mega Games 2, Mega Games 3, Mega Games 6, Mega Games 6, Mega Games 6, and Mega Games I, which is there. So this is the way that they're numbered here. Now, if I look, for example, at this one, I'm just pushing it down to select it. You check the 3 dots. You go Get Info. Mega Game 6 Volume 3. So it is a Volume 3, even though the Retroid has seen it as being a Volume 2. So what am I going to do about that? Let's go back into our Retroid launcher. And here, hold it down, rename the game. I'm going to rename the game to be Volume 3, he says. Fat fingers. Fat fingers, people. Volume 3. And that's okay. And I'll say that's okay. And it will now lose the game image. or in this case, it's kept it as the Volume 2 image. So now I'm going to actually search for it. Again, how to search for it is very clear from the guides and the setup guides by Retro Game Core, if no one else. But here, this is the cover for Mega 6 Volume 3. I forgot to mention, it's actually called Mega 6, not Mega Game 6. So that might be something I might rename in the future. But we have that. When you get in the picture, what you actually have to do, maybe this is just me, I don't know why, you don't just hold it to download the picture. You have to press it once, and then it comes up search inside image, and then you hold it, and then it gives you the option to download image, which is now downloading. Boom. There we go. So we've got Mega Games 2, Mega Games 3. You'll notice I renamed Mega Games I to be Mega Games 1, so it makes more sense in this context. In terms of renaming games, something to keep in mind is that when you rename it here, it doesn't rename the folder structure that I've just shown you. So you can rename it to literally whatever you want. Another thing to keep in mind is that when you rename games, as well as picking, oh, here we are, Mortal Kombat, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the Fighting Edition. This is a bootleg hack, which I discovered because the picture wasn't there, and then when I Googled it, that's what I confirmed. This one here is not a hack, it's just a rubbish game. But again, I only know that because I Googled it. These are text adventures, which again, don't automatically fill up the pictures, so I had to Google them. This one, Pia Solar, for example, is a homebrew game which I'm very interested in, so I added a picture to it. Whilst Pocket Monsters here and Pocket Monsters 2 here are both hacks, and Populous 2 Wrath of the Gods is also a hack. And again, one of the main indicators that something is a hack or a homebrew game is that it doesn't auto-populate with a picture. The reason these both pictures are the same is this is Pulseman, and then this is Pulseman, the Japanese version, which is something I'm kind of... Just leave me alone. I'll explain that in a different video if I explain it at all, as to why I have Japanese versions of certain games. Again, Rockman X3, that is a hack as well. And when we go down to Streets of Rage, which I wanted to show you, for Streets of Rage, you'll notice that Streets of Rage 2 is here, and it also had the picture Streets of Rage 2 here, but it has the name Streets of Rage 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it, I'm going to go to box cover, I'm going to go to Google Images, and the artwork I tend to like is the blue artwork. Download image. Boom, I've got Streets of Rage set up there. So even though it's a legitimate game, it did have the wrong picture. Long story short, I guess what I'm saying is that for a lot of these, there's a lot of pictures you're going to have to find yourself. Super Tank War, also a hack. There's a lot of these you're going to find pictures for yourself, and there's a lot of these where, as well as finding pictures yourself, you're going to identify that they are hacks and that you may or may not want them on your Retroid. If you do want them, as I've kept a couple of homebrew games, great. If you don't, then you need to delete them. And then even the ones that have automatically scraped pictures because they're legitimate games and legitimate ROMs that were actually released and licensed, they may do it incorrectly. So I guess that's the truth about scraping pictures. I didn't know any of that before I started, and sorting out the pictures for what is a collection of 4,500 ROMs is a bit of a it's a bit of a mission. I don't mind doing it. It has taken quite a lot of time, but the truth is that it's something that you can do quite easily as a quiet kind of background activity when you're I don't know, watching TV, when you're on the bus. Well, not on the bus because you need Wi-Fi. But when you're at a friend's house or when you're just killing time before dinner, anything like that, you can just do it in 5 or 10 minute bursts to just kind of kill it off bit by bit. That's what I wanted to show just in terms of what I've learned about scraping and scraping pictures. We're going to dive back into the rest of whatever video this is, which is probably talking more about my Retroid Pocket 3 and other orientation and configuration things that I had to work out for myself. And hello YouTube, here's a quick video, quite possibly a video within a video, where I just want to show you something on my Retroid. So this is my Retroid Pocket 3, and this is something that I hadn't seen on any other YouTube videos, so as standard I'm just going to show you here. Is it zooming in? Ah, it's nice and clear, right. So go to PlayStation, And you can see here I've got a load of games. Something slightly quirky about my games, which I noticed, which no one else online appeared to have mentioned. If we look at, for example, oh, don't you can see that here? We've got Saga Frontier 2, the second one along. And I'm just going to check and see, is running on RetroArch, PCSX Rearmed. And if we go into, oh, can you, it's not very clear. Oh, there we are. Saga Frontier 2, the second one here. So I'm going to go into this, he says. And as you'll see, it's in the middle of a cutscene. Now, this game was actually slightly odd when I started playing it, because I've just restarted it now. And as you see, published by Square Europe. However, it doesn't really appear to accept any inputs, or rather it does it in a slightly erratic way. This is what I've been doing. I've been going through all the ROMs that I have, and one by one I've been testing them. And that's not a matter of just making sure they boot. It's a matter of making sure that I can get past, hang on, I'll just drop the volume. It's a matter of making sure I can get past the boot menu into the start menu. So as either I've shown you or I'm going to show you, with some games, it locks up at the loading memory card screen. That's fine, just move over to playing DuckStation or via the DuckStation emulator. However, in this case, you'll see I'm pressing everything and it's pausing, sure, but it's not actually, it's in the middle of a game. And it's just, other than being able to boot out to the RetroArch menu, it's just in the middle of a game. What is going on? Lets me pause it, but that's all. So it's behaving oddly. So let me boot out of this, close content, and quit RetroArch. So we're straight into this. Now, as I said before, if a game has an issue where it locks up on a memory card, saying it's loading or is trying to sort out a memory file, as I have hopefully already shown previously, all you do is you switch over to DuckStation. So in this case, it's behaving oddly, so I'm going to move over to DuckStation. I'm going to save that. And once that's saved, I'm going to go back into Saga Frontier. Saga Frontier 2, remember. Now notice what happens here. Error. Attempting to run a libcrypt protected game without an SBI file. I don't know what an SBI file is. However, what this means is that the dump is incomplete and the SBI file must be added. In other words, the ROM itself isn't actually a complete and correct ROM dump. Press OK, system failed to boot. So the reason this is interesting to point out is that PCSX Rearmed, and let's just go back to that here, so the RetroArch emulator, allows you to boot ROMs even if the ROMs aren't correctly 100% accurate dumps. However, DuckStation, which does work to get over that occasional memory loading issue that we've seen on a few games, DuckStation, however, has a higher fidelity of what it requires in ROMs. So in this case, it requires a ROM that has the correct SBI file. So if, for example, we look at the title here, you'll see here are some of my games. And you'll see the ones that require DuckStation are ones that I will actively say. So for example, here, Street Fighter Alpha 3 requires DuckStation to run. All the rest run on PCSX Rearmed. However, Saga Frontier 2, when you try running on PCSX Rearmed, highlights... Oh, sorry, it keeps zooming in and out. It's a bit frustrating. What that highlights to me is that actually this ROM needs to be replaced. So on that basis, I am now going to have to replace the Saga Frontier 2 ROM. This issue with SBI files and incomplete ROMs only being diagnosed by different emulators outside RetroArch is one that I haven't seen elsewhere on the internet, and I had to learn about myself. So that's why I'm sharing it here for you, the people.
And there we have it. Sorry for the slightly disjointed editing. Those videos were filmed over the course of about a year and a half, to be honest. Some of them were filmed ages ago, some of them were filmed literally 10 minutes ago. Um, but yeah, that's just my overview of the Retroid Pocket. In case we haven't really done a review of the Retroid Pocket per se, long story short, it's amazing. The Retroid Pocket 3 is fantastic. It has the best price to performance ratio of any device on the market, bar none. It's brilliant. I've configured them for my friends, which I'll cover in a few videos time. I made a few gift ones. They're really fun to configure. They're really easy to configure. And as you can see from the videos I've just shown you, I really kind of went down a whole rabbit hole of getting into the weeds on the very unique configuration on a game by game basis. I can confirm I have fired up every single one of my 4,500 games on my Retroid just to test them and see if they work and configure them and mess around with them and that sort of stuff. So on that note, I mean, what can I say? It's a great device, highly recommended. I'm really glad I picked one up. And they're on the Retroid Pocket 5 now, I believe, and they have the Mini and they have lots of other spin-offs and stuff. Well worth checking out. I cannot recommend a provider enough. They're not perfect. We covered that in the in the community video, but they are a great provider of a great bit of hardware. That's extremely usable and fantastic entry level once you're willing to learn how to set up your own console rather than buy one of those janky plug and play ones from Amazon. The only tip I would have for you is please do make sure that you've set up your ROM set perfectly before bothering to configure a handheld like this, because if your ROM set still contains duplicates and jank and mess and that sort of stuff, it ends up becoming quite fiddly to tidy it up. And honestly, it's just much nicer having a really refined, perfected ROM set before you actually copy everything over to an SD card and internal memory and you're dealing with that. So that's just the one extra tip I would say. With that out of the way, tomorrow's video, or whatever the next video in this is going to be, is going to be talking about how to refine your ROM set and what the pros and cons of particular consoles over other consoles are, what I would recommend, what I learned, and hopefully you'll find it useful. Until then, everyone, stay classy.